Hello everybody, I'm Robert Donovan and welcome to this episode of Tradecraft Solutions. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to make a planet. It's a low poly planet. There's many ways of doing this. I like this one because it's a low poly. It's low poly, it still gets you good detail, and you can use it very easily in animations. So we're going to start by, well actually, before we get going here, to do this file, to do this tutorial, you are going to need to go get this file from blendswap.com. It's called Earth in Cycles. It is by one Adriano Oliveira. It's very good work. I highly recommend getting it. You will need to get a free account at BlendSwap to get this thing. I recommend that too. It's a very useful and educational site. Once you have that file, you'll have all the image textures you need to do the tutorial we're going to do today. We will not be doing the moon. We'll just be doing the Earth. All right, so let's open up a new Blender scene, and all we have to do that is new and reload the startup file. There we go. Okay. Now, I have a couple of things here. Let me get my screencast keys going so that you all can see what I'm doing down here in this corner. A couple of things we have to get out of the way. I have a computer that has a dedicated numpad key on it, and I use the numpad keys a lot to do things like switching from perspective to orthographic. I've deleted the default scene in Blender. I have just a camera in the center of the scene. I've deleted the default lamp, cube, and camera. And I'm in front orthographic mode by default when I start up Blender. If you do not have a numpad key on your laptop or computer, and many people today do not, there is a way to make the number keys at the top of your keyboard, which Blender considers functionally different from the numpad keys. There's a way to make those act as though they were numpad keys. Go into File, click on User Preferences, and go into Input, and make sure that this checkbox, Emulate Numpad, is checked. I have checked it here, and I will keep it checked for most of my tutorials for those who don't have the numpad keys. On some off-brand laptops and older machines, I have heard, it has not been my experience, but I've heard from some people tell me that the Emulate Numpad keys does not always work correctly. If that should happen to you, there is another option. It's not quite as good as the numpad keys, but it does work pretty well if you have a laptop that doesn't have a numpad, and that is to activate this add-on right here. Click on Add-ons in the User Preferences and activate 3D View, 3D Navigation. Just make sure this checkbox is checked. It has come standard with Blender for quite some time. I don't recall the version it started, but if you don't see it in this list, I suspect you need to update to a newer version of Blender. To make all this stuff permanent, that is usable the next time you open Blender, click on Save User Settings. What that 3D Navigation add-on does is it adds this tab to your tool shelf where you can click all these buttons to do all the same things you're doing with the numpad keys. It even gives you the shortcut key that corresponds to what that button does if you hold your mouse over it. So that takes care of that. Let us get to creating a planet or two. Oh, by the way, if your interface looks different from mine, I do not have the default theme installed. I have the Science Lab theme running. So the first thing we need to do, I am going to do this in Cycles Render. So make sure you have Cycles Render Engine selected, and that will get us started here. Next thing we got to do is add a UV sphere. So Shift A, Mesh, and UV sphere. And make the segments 64, the rings 32, and the size 5. Hit the Enter key on that last one. And then go up here to the Tools tab under Shading and set that to Smooth. Now that you have your sphere created, we need to go from Object Mode into Edit Mode, so hit the Tab key to do that, and then hit Numpad 7 to go to the top view. Now we're going to zoom in, and the first thing I want to do is make this ring of triangles at the top and bottom of the sphere as small as possible. The images we're going to be using from the Adriano file are equirectangular, and triangles cause distortion when you try to map to those. So the way I'm going to minimize the distortion is by making this ring of triangles at the top and bottom of the sphere as small as reasonably possible. To do that, we're going to add a loop cut. Shift R, left click once to select the loop cut. Notice that deselects everything in the sphere. and then scale this thing in until the vertices are just touching like that. Left click to lock that in and hit A to deselect. Now zoom in some. Put your mouse cursor between any two vertices on that innermost ring of vertices and do Shift, Alt, right click, and then over in the center, hold the Shift key down and right click once. That'll select all the vertices in that top ring. We want to scale this thing down to the center vertex at the top of the sphere. By default, Blender sets as the pivot point the median point, which is the center of the sphere. We don't want that. Go ahead and we need to select the active element to get this to do what we want. So click on that. Now when we hit S to scale, we will be scaling to the top, basically the last thing we clicked, which is that center vertex at the top of the sphere. So hit S to scale. Scale this thing down until it's just inside that red and white circle with the crosshair. That's the 3D cursor. And then left click to lock that in. Hit A to deselect. All right, that takes care of the top. Now we got to do the bottom. So hit Control numpad 7. That flips the sphere over and you're on the bottom. Zoom out a little bit if you haven't done that already. Control R. I'll try that again here. Control R. Left click once to select that ring of vertices. Scale it in until they're just touching that innermost ring. Left click to lock that in. Hit A to deselect that ring. And zoom in. Get your cursor between any two vertices. Shift Alt right click. And then Shift right click on the center. We've already got the the active elements selected as our pivot point. So hit S to scale. And down we go inside, just inside that cursor. Don't cross them. If you go too far and they cross, then you're going to have a problem. So you get them just inside there like that. Left click to lock that in, hit A to deselect. And now we have gotten that thing about as small as we can make it and not cause problems for ourselves later on. So zoom out until you can see the entire sphere in frame here and go to the left-hand view. That's Control numpad 3. We now need to UV unwrap this thing, and I want to mark a seam. So Shift Alt right click again and select that loop of vertices, then type Control E and click Mark Seam. And then hit A to deselect. You will see the seam marked in red. Now go to front view. That's numpad 1. And we need to switch from vertex select mode, which we've been in up to now, to face select mode. The hotkeys for that are Control Tab and then select face. And we need to select that face right. Whoops, I just left click. So when you accidentally do that, just hit Shift S and do cursor to center. That puts it back on the origin. Right click on that face right there that intersects the top top right-hand quadrant of the 3D cursor, and then we need to select the entire sphere. So if we hit A, which is select, deselect all, that deselects everything since we had that face selected. Now we hit A again to select the entire sphere, and then hit the U key to bring up the UV mapping menu. The mapping method we want is follow active quads. This will ignore the triangles at the top and bottom of the sphere. You want your edge length mode set to length and then click OK. All right, this has now been UV unwrapped. We now need to go to the UV image editor and we want to split this window to put, we need a dual view of this thing. So on these crosshatch diagonals at the top corner here, move your mouse cursor over that, left click and drag. That takes your window out like so. With your mouse cursor in this window, hit the T key to close the tool shelf. And I'm going to pull this thing out just a little bit here. Whoops, did that again. Shift S, cursor to center. Shift S, cursor to, I said Shift S, cursor to center. There we go. Sorry about that. And there, I want to see the materials button here. Okay, so we have that taken care of. Let's size this up a little bigger there. All right, we need to put this window, the smaller one, the one we just opened, into texture view, and then we need to go over here to the UV image editor. And you'll see we have this huge rectangular image map in there. We need to tell Blender what image to map. So click Open, and we're going to go to that Adriano file. I'll put it into preview mode for you so you can see what we have here. we want to map this image to the first sphere. That's just the surface of the Earth strung together from a bunch of satellite photos from NASA. Click Open Image, and we have added the texture, but we don't see anything in Texture View over here. That is because in Cycles, you need to add a material to an object before the texture will show up. I prefer to do that in the node editor, so go over here and click on the node editor. I'm going to hit N to close that properties panel, click New down here, and that gives us a basic default diffuse white material. We want to add an image texture to this, so do Shift A, Texture, Image Texture, and we've already imported this image, so you can click the Browse Image icon here, click that file we just imported, and I'm connecting these up. That doesn't really do anything here, but we need to do it later, so let's just get it done. And now, though, since we have added that image, you can now see that there is something mapped to that sphere, a bunch of little Earths in every square on the globe. So we need now to go back to the UV image editor to set all this right. So now that we're back in the UV image editor, obviously this thing is 90 degrees wrong. The continents don't point west to east. So over in the UV image editor window, hit A to select the entire map, and then press R to rotate, and then do -90 and either left click or hit the Enter key. Okay, that takes care of rotating everything on the right axis. Now we need to scale it properly. So again, in the UV image editor with the entire map selected, hit S and then scale this thing down. Actually, you know what, I got a better idea. Do Control Z to take that back to where it was. And before you do any more scaling, let's set the pivot point to the 2D cursor like that. Now scale this thing. It'll just scale right to the 2D cursor. It's a little easier to handle that way. Not harder the other way, but I like it better this way. So hit S to scale, and down we go till it's just inside those crosshairs there. Left click to lock that in. That's still not quite scaled right, so let's zoom in and scale it down until it'll fit inside the image bounds. So hit S and scale again, and take this down about like that. That gets us about where we need to be. Left click to lock that in. Let's zoom in again. And then hit G to grab and move that map inside the image bounds like that. Doesn't need to be centered, it just needs to be inside because I want to constrain this thing to the image bounds. So click UV and click Constrain to Image Bounds. Then hit G to grab again and pull it over this corner, left click to drop it, and then scale it until it doesn't scale anymore on either axis. Then left click to lock that in. Now if you zoom out over here in Texture View, you will see we have now got a well-mapped, well-scaled image mapped to this sphere. We don't need the UV image editor anymore, so let's go ahead and just go to the node editor, like so. And, excuse me. All right, now we have a couple more little chores to do to get this thing completely mapped to this sphere. Over in this smaller window, hit numpad 7, and that'll take you to top view. So zoom in, you'll see there's a little hole at the very top of the Earth. That's from the fact that we used the follow active quads method, which ignored those triangles in the mapping, thus minimizing our distortion, which is what we wanted. So we need to fix these holes. The first thing we need to do is hit A to deselect everything. We need to go back to vertex select mode, so do Control Tab and select, click on vertex there, zoom in, and once again mouse cursor between any two vertices, Shift Alt right click, to the center, Shift right click. Only this time we're going to do Alt M, and we're going to click Merge at last. We're not going to scale it, we're going to merge them to a single point, and then hit A to deselect. And you'll see a little distortion there around the hole, but if you zoom out 7 or 8 times, okay, 10 or 20 times, you don't see it. All right, now do Control numpad 7, switch to the bottom, zoom back in until you see the hole at the bottom of the Earth, and repeat that same procedure. Go ahead and mouse cursor between the two vertices, Shift Alt right click, Shift center, right click once, Alt M, and merge at last. A little bit of distortion around the seam you can see there. Hit A to deselect. But as you zoom out, you find that it's very, very little. So now zoom out till you can see the whole sphere. Numpad 1 to go to front view, and then tab to go back to object mode. There we have a diffuse Earth. Next step we got to do is light and shade this thing to make it look a little bit more realistic. To do that, we need to split this window horizontally. So go back up here to the chevrons, left click and pull straight down. And leave the top one set to texture view. Let the bottom one be rendered view. And we need to add a sun to this thing. So do Shift A, lamp, and sun in the top window. That puts it right in the center of the scene where the 3D cursor is. So left click this red arrow, move it over to the left like that so we can see what we're doing. Doesn't really matter where the sun is in cycles, but it does matter which way this ray is pointing, because that's the direction from which the sunlight is being cast. Right now it looks as if the Earth is orbiting the sun with the poles facing the sun, which makes ice caps a little incongruous if you think about it. So, first thing we want to do is rotate this sun so that it's pointing in the right direction. So, hit in the top window here, hit R to rotate, and type -90. That gets our direction correct. Now go over to the sun properties here, make the strength 4, and set this thing just slightly to yellow, because of course we don't want to deprive Superman of any of his powers. There we go, and well, it does also make it look more real. And then the size, 0.003. That gives us some nice tight shadows. All right, that takes care of getting the sun itself configured correctly. Now let's configure the shadows on the Earth where we want them to be. For that, I am going to hold the middle mouse button down, scroll over, and I'm going to change the pivot point up here to the 3D cursor. Now I want to rotate the sun around the 3D cursor, so press R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate this, whoops, wait a minute, left click, do Control Z, and before I do that, I want to hit numpad 7, go to top view. Now rotate this thing around the cursor. So hit R to rotate and go around like that. You'll see in the bottom how the shadows are doing their thing here. Let's take this thing all the way around here. About like that. And now let's hit, what do we want to do here? Hit numpad 1, go back to front view, and hit R to rotate again. I'm going to take this thing around about like that. Alrighty, that's the shadow I want to see on the Earth for this picture. You can change it yourself to anything you like. I'm in the United States. If you're somewhere else, feel free to put your country front and center. You won't hurt my feelings at all. And set the shadows up any way you like too. So we now have the sun positioned where we want it, so we don't need the top window anymore. So click on the chevrons in the bottom window, and then with the left mouse button, and then drag the mouse cursor. Whoops, I just did that wrong. Hang on. Let's go ahead and to close a window, you just click on the cursor and then drag the mouse cursor into the window you want to close. And we're going to do that again up here, like that. Okay, that was what I was trying to do before, and I messed up when I moved the mouse cursor. So there we have our handiwork so far. We have the Earth mapped, we have the sun on it, we got the shadows set. Now we just need to make the water look wet and the land look dry. So to do that, we need to add a gloss to the water. So let's go over here to our outliner, left click where it says sphere, and before we do anything else, let's name all this stuff, because that gets to be a good that's a good habit to get into here. So just EARTH, make that Earth. And we're going to go ahead and name the material the same thing. That way 3 months down the road, you'll remember you won't have to remember what goes with what. All right, there you have that. Now we need to create a gloss on this water to make it look wet and a little transparent as well. So to do that, over here in the node editor, we need to add a mix shader and a glossy shader. So Shift A, shader, mix shader, and just drag this until the wire, also called the noodle, lights up. And then left click. That'll automatically connect the thing up between them. And now we need a glossy shader to mix with that. So Shift A, glossy. Put that down there and put that in there. Okay, well that gives us a gloss, but it's way too hard and it's over the entire surface of the Earth, and of course it's way too bright at the moment. So we need to do a little work here to modify this just slightly. To that end, Let's move these around here so you can a little more neatly. And now we need to duplicate this mix shader. So left click on that, Shift D to duplicate, and then drop that one right in there. Next we need to add a transparent shader. So transparent, and I'm hitting Shift A to bring that menu up. All right, we now have a transparent and a gloss, but we do not have it over the water only. It's still over everything. We need to tell Blender we only want it on the water. We use something called a specularity map for that, which is an image, and that is provided by the Adriano file. So left click on the image texture, do Shift A, and we want a, actually we don't need to do Shift A, we can just left click on this and duplicate it. So do Shift D, pull that down there. And on this folder here, it says Open Image. Click that. Go to the Adriano folder, and what we need is the specular JPG file here. Notice that all this is a high contrast black and white image of this. So select that, open it, and then take the color to the factor input on this second mix shader. That gives us very glossy, very shiny water and very shiny rivers, and it does, however, you will note that the land is now diffuse. So to take that down to the point where it's something sane, let's knock this down to 0.05 as the factor on this mix. Just click there and enter that value. So now we have a surface of the Earth with specular on the water. You can also mess with the type of algorithm used to make the glossy. For this one, I kind of like I like either the GCX myself, I think looks the best. But that's up to you, personal taste. All right, now if you zoom in here, you will see that the land and water are exactly the same level. There's no elevation at all on this land. So what we're going to do, because I don't want to add polys, the standard way of dealing with this is to do a subsurf modifier and then add a displacement modifier. Problem with that is it adds a ton of vertices, and I want to keep this as low poly as possible. So we're going to use this. Go here to take the color output to the displacement input of the material output. Now that gives us way more elevation on the land than I really want. So do a Shift A, converter math, and then set this to multiply. And then we'll drop this in here. And then by adjusting this value, we can control how much elevation we get. So do 0.125, just to kind of, for the purposes of this tutorial, that's what I'm going to use. If you want to add a little more, a little less, feel free. You will not hurt my feelings. All right, I would probably go, if I were doing this for a real production thing, I'd probably go a little lower than that, but there you go. All right, so that is the surface of the Earth with the rendering displacement. Now, if you look edge on, it's still completely flat, so it isn't adding vertices, it's just a rendering effect, but for what we're doing, it'll work fine. For other things, it won't, but for this particular application, it works great. Okay, so that gives us the surface of the Earth. We also want to do clouds and an atmosphere on this thing, so the easiest way I have found to do this is just duplicate this sphere, resize it, and change the material. So let's do that. With the Earth sphere selected, like that, just left-click there or right-click on it in the viewer to select it. Do Shift D, and I usually just hit the Enter key to avoid moving the mouse accidentally when I left-click to lock this in. If, however, you should accidentally bump the mouse and do something like that before you hit left-click, you can just hit Escape, and that will lock it in and take it back to where it's supposed to be. If you should left-click with it off-center. All right, let me go ahead and duplicate this again. We'll move this off here and then left-click. We now have 3 spheres. I don't really want that third sphere, but in this case, if I'd already left-click, just do Control-Z, and that'll get rid of that duplicated sphere. So here we are back on Earth 001, and we want to first go to the Active Data button there and change that to clouds, like so. Whoops. There. All right, and now over to the material. Now, this is important, so pay attention here, folks. We have duplicated that first sphere. That means we also duplicated our material. So that means if I click on Earth, I have an Earth material, and if I click on clouds, I have the same material. Problem is, with two spheres referring to the same material, if I change anything on the cloud sphere, I'm going to change it on the Earth sphere too. I don't want that. I want clouds to have its own unique and independent material. The way we make that happen is to click this 2 right there. Now we have an Earth 01 material to go with our Earth 01 sphere, formerly named, or our Earth, which has now been named clouds. So double click that and name it clouds 2. There you go. And we're going to be doing that a couple more times, so remember that procedure. Well, actually, we'll be doing it again, so if you don't remember, you'll get a refresher in about 5-6 minutes. Okay, so now we have this thing renamed. Let's go to the active data again here. We want to scale this up. Let's do it about 1.007. And I'd have said 007 there with a bad British accent, but I don't want to drive away any potential viewers in the UK, so I have restrained myself there. All right, now we have this thing scaled up and renamed. All we got to do now is change the material to clouds from its present Earth surface, which we already duplicated. So over here in the node editor, you'll see we have one node selected here. Hit A to deselect that, hit A again to select everything, and hit A again to make sure everything is deselected. Then hit B, that means box select, and then click and drag. Kind of lasso all these nodes there. Hit X to delete them. Shift A, shader mix. And now we need a diffuse and a transparent. So here we have our diffuse. And that's going to go on the bottom input. In Blender, on all these mix nodes, it's a bit counterintuitive, but the bottom shader is rendered as the top layer when the image is rendered. So we're basically painting our diffuse on top of our transparency. So let's add the transparent node in there. All right, and what we get there is a semi-transparent white sphere. We want the white part to be clouds and the rest to be transparent where there are no clouds. So for that, we need another image texture. So go Texture, Image Texture. Click the Open Image button here. Go to the Adriano file, and this time we want the clouds JPEG, this one here. Notice it is also just a black and white image. The way this works, these are essentially working as masks. Anything white is opaque, anything black is transparent. So click the open image and take that color to the factor on the mix. And there we have clouds, and we're going to do the displacement trick one more time. Just take the color output to the displacement, Shift A, converter math, make it a multiplier, drop it in there, and I'm going to do 0.125 again. So that is our clouds sphere added to this image, and the only other thing now we need to do is add an atmosphere and an atmospheric glow. So same procedure, do Shift D, hit the Enter key. We're already in the active data, so let's change clouds 01 to atmosphere. And go to the material, click the 2, important not to forget to do that, and then change clouds 01 to atmosphere as well. And there you have that. And now the other thing we need to do here is in the active data, we need to size this up. I'm going to go with 1.016. All right, that makes that just a little bit bigger. Now let's work on the material over here. Same procedure here. Do A to deselect anything, A to select everything, and then A again to make sure everything's deselected. B for box select, click left and drag, and hit X. And now we need to add, you guessed it, a mix shader, or if you prefer not to guess, surmised. Okay, that takes care of the mix shader. We now need to add a second mix shader for this. This is kind of Adriano's formula for an atmospheric glow, which I like. So I'm going to do Shift D, drag this over here, take the output of this shader to the top input of the first shader, and in this bottom input, Shift A, we want to do a transparent. So take that down here, plug it in there. And then for the two inputs for this shader, we want a diffuse and a transparent again. So diffuse, and the diffuse again will be on the bottom. And a transparent going on the top there. Whoops, missed. All right, and the factor on this first or this second mix shader is going to use, we want to create kind of a sort of a reverse gradient, or maybe a kind of a Fresnel effect where the center is clear and then the atmospheric haze or glow as you get close to the edge of the atmosphere intensifies as you get to the edge. So we're going to do Shift A, layer weight, and then Shift A, we need a way to control that output, so we're going to use for this one a color ramp. Take the facing output from the layer weight to the factor input on the color ramp, color output to the factor on this second mixed shader. You see where we're going here. And so now take this, I like a very subtle atmospheric glow, so I'm going to knock this down to 0.12. And then over on the color ramp, this first slider, the black slider, we're going to make that 0.09. And then over here, we're going to click to the number 1, so we're dealing with the white shader, and I'm going to make that 0.76. And the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we're looking at the entire, we want to make sure we're looking at the outside, the entire outside of this thing, and not looking at back faces through the transparent sphere. So we're going to do Shift A. And we want to do input geometry and put the back-facing node as the factor on that mix. Makes this a little more opaque, which helps in compositing, and it also makes this thing a little easier to work with. So you can play with the type of interpolation that is used in this color ramp node. I am going to set it to, well, let me just show you what they are. Constant gets rid of everything. B-spline goes more towards the center. Linear you've already seen. Cardinal is a slightly sharper fall off. It's close to linear. And then we have ease, which is a very, very extreme fall off there. So I'm going to go with cardinal because it's kind of a good in-between. I'm also going to set this diffuse to something just slightly bluish, like that. And that's good enough for me. Okay. So that's our planetary glow. Last thing we want to do to kind of get this image going is the star field. And the star field is just another image. We're going to import that to the background, our world settings here. Click on the world button, and we're going to do it as an environment texture. You can also do this in the node editor. Just click world here. And if I click use nodes here or use nodes here, it gives me this gray background that we've got already. It just adds some nodes to do what was already being done. We want to set up an environment texture using the star field image that came with the Adriano file. So do Shift A, texture, environment texture, click open image into the Adriano file, and we want this nice 360-degree panoramic view of the Milky Way. Plug that in for the color. There you go. And if for some reason you forget to plug in the color, for if you do like the image texture and you plug this in without opening an image, you get this hot 70s Holy Carpaccio pink. Well, Carpaccio is red, but close enough. And that's just if you forget to pick an image. So way to do that is to pick your image. Way to avoid that is to pick your image first. Now, that gets rid of the pink. Unfortunately, we don't see the star field. That's because you have to be in camera view to see, or perspective view, to see the star field. So my camera is in the very center of the scene, which means it is engulfed in the sphere. So I'll be looking out from a dark place in camera view, as you see here. So I'm going to go back, hit numpad 1 to go to front view, and then I want to do Control-Alt numpad 0. That aligns the camera to the view. And now I want to hit my N key, zoom up here, lock the camera to the view, and this enables me to zoom out from within camera view, and I want to zoom out until all the Earth is in the frame, like that. Now I'm going to unlock this camera from the camera to the view and hit the N key. Now I'm going to zoom back in a little bit to make that the same size it was before, only now we have a star field. So that is our planet, that is our atmosphere and clouds with the surface there and the planet. Now the next thing we want to do is kind of enhance this planetary glow, and we're going to do that in compositing. In order to do that, I want to add a mask. I want to create an ID mask for this. So I'm going to click on my atmosphere, I'm going to go to Materials Settings here, go to Materials, under Settings, scroll down and give this a pass index of 1, and then go to the Scene Compositor Settings, click on the Passes menu here, and turn on Material Index. That way the pass index information will get passed to the render layer in the compositor. Now, in the animation that I uploaded about a month ago titled The Arrival, I also did kind of a planetary shield effect similar to what I've got on my desktop background image here. And I'm going to show you how to, basically all this is the variation on the planetary glow, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how I did that using a fourth sphere. You could just use this third sphere and just make it your shield, but if you want to keep the planetary glow intact, you're going to need to add another sphere. Now right now we're at 6,144 faces, which is not a lot of polygons for a planet. Look at any of the other planet renders on blendswap.com and you'll see they're all a lot higher than that. So we're doing pretty well here. And we're going to add another 2,048 polygons by adding that fourth sphere, but we're going to basically use the same material settings. So we are going to give it a unique material, but I'll show you what I'm going to do. Go and select the atmosphere and do Shift-D and hit the Enter key. All right, now, with that done, we now have an Atmosphere 01. Let's do the same thing we did before. Atmosphere 01 is now going to be changed to Shield. All right, and we're going to scale this up to about 1.06. I want this thing to be noticeably larger. Okay, and we have this thing scaled up to 1.06. Now go to the material, scroll back up here, and click on the 2, and then double click and label that shield. All right, now on the shield, click on that and go here to your objects and materials. We are not going to delete these nodes. We're just going to change a few of the settings. And that's all I did to make a planetary shield effect for that. It's a very simple, low-rent planetary shield. First, we're going to set this to 0.2. All right. Then on this number 1 slider, we're going to move that up. And this is on the white slider, not the black. Make that 0.85. And then click here to go to the 0 slider and take this up to about 0.175, 2.0, somewhere in there. So let's go with 0.2. Just keep them the same. All right, now you don't see a major change here. All it looks like is we've got this sort of cloudy sphere over there. The last thing we're going to do here is, well, for the second to the last thing here, let's change cardinal to ease. And then we're going to change this diffuse shader, delete that, and then Shift-A, add an emission shader. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can better see what I'm doing. I'm going to change the color here. I think the hex value I started with when I started playing with the shields was like something like 1916E7. Yeah, that's a little too saturated. Let's go over something like that, or maybe even a little less. There we go. Something like that. Okay, and let's knock the strength of the emission up just a touch. Okay, now come down here to the material settings and give this a pass index of 2. Because we want to separate, we want to be able to apply effects to that material separate from the atmosphere material. So that will do all of that for us. I'll zoom back out here. All right, so that's all 4 of your spheres. The one thing we still need to do, though, is give the Earth its proper axial tilt. And to do that, I'm going to go just briefly back into solid mode, and I'm going to add an empty. So Shift A, empty, and we want it to be a sphere, and then hit the T key to bring up the properties, and you want to make the radius on the empty 6. That way we can see it when we're in solid view. All right, now with that, go ahead and close the tool shelf, hit T. Now what we want to do is I'm going to parent all of my other spheres to this empty. And that way I can turn all 4 spheres at once, but still leave them able to move independently of each other if I want to spin them around a different way. So what we want to do then is we want to left click on the shield, hold the shift key down, left click on the atmosphere, left click on the clouds, left click on the Earth, and left click on the empty. And then go over here, do Control P, click Object. That parents everything to the empty. So now whatever we do to that empty will be done to those 4 spheres all at once in to the same amount. So now go to the active data for the empty, and on the y-axis put minus 23.44. which is the actual axial tilt of the Earth. And now go back to rendered view. There we have the actual proper axial tilt for the Earth, so the seasons will not be disrupted. Don't you feel better now? So the next thing we want to do is some compositing. We want to enhance the glow on the atmospheric glow. We want to put a little glow on the shield and finish this thing off. So first thing we need to do then is give this a render, and I've got my render settings already set. I got this at 100%. I'm only going to do 25 samples because this is basically a test render. And what else have I got in here? Oh, I have the border checked, which is what that's going to do is I had to stop the video and start it again because I got interrupted. So before I had this, when I turn the border on, it does that. So it only renders what the camera can see. And that's basically all we need to do the first render. Also, let me check my sun here under the sun properties. Oh yeah, make sure multiple importance sample is selected. You get more accurate shadow. You get less noise basically with that. So let's go ahead and give this a render here. I'm going to hit F12. Okay, the render completed. That is our Earth with our planetary glow and shield. Let's hit escape, and we're going to go to the compositor here. Now we notice we have the index MA value. We're going to use that to create a couple of masks. We're going to go here to converter, ID mask. Take the ID mask output, put it to the ID value, and if we use nodes, click backdrop, there we go, and let's see, shift control right left click, that gives us a viewer node, there we go. And I had tested this before, so that's why the image came up. But now if we take this mask output to the viewer node, we get, by default, the entire image is index 0. We have given it a couple of other indices which separates the atmosphere sphere and the shield sphere into 2 separate layers. So if we click on 1, we get the atmosphere, and we click on 2, we get the mask. Now we can use that information to separate out the various spheres to apply different effects to each one. First we need to add this image to the original image so that we can get the color of of what this white is supposed to be allowing through to show up. So Shift A, do a color mix node, and you want the mask on the factor, and you want the original image on the bottom. And you can see the blue coming through there. Now take the top input here, just take it all the way to black. That gives us our atmospheric edge. And so we want to apply just a couple of simple glare and blur effects to this. So Shift A, and we want to go Filter, Glare, change it to Fog Glow, and we're going to leave the mix. Actually, I'm going to also add a gamma node in here because I've given myself a little bit too little to work with otherwise. So let's go Color, Gamma, drop that in there, and we're going to drop this down to like 0.7 or so, 0.6, there we go. And now we're going to take the threshold of the glow down to, there we go, about 0.5, there we are. We get a little glow around the edge there. And now we need to soften this edge just a little bit. So Shift A, Filter, and Blur. I'm going to go fast Gaussian with this one, relative, and we don't need much. I'm thinking 2% should be more than adequate. Let's put aspect correction on the x-axis there. And knock the blur size down 0.7-ish. Yeah, there we go. All right, so now if we take this, let's go ahead and I'll show you what that, if you just wanted to do a planetary glow and you didn't want the shield, go Color, Mix, and change this to Add, because we want to add this image to the original image, which means then we change this to Add, drop this in here. So I want the output of the blur to go to the top, and then I want to lay the original image on top of that. And there you just get your planetary glow, and without the shield there, you would just see the planetary glow. And then you would basically just take this to the compositor like this, render that, and you'd get your planetary glow. And you see it does a nice job of smoothing out the gradient with that bright edge. It also, without the shield around it, it kind of makes it pop from the background, gives it kind of an edge light effect. Well, I also wanted to do if you want to do a planetary shield on top of this, all we've got to do is we're going to apply a separate set of effects to the shield and then add those together. So let's duplicate, excuse me, let's duplicate these 5 nodes here. So select them all by holding the Shift key down, Shift D, drag them down here. All right, now change the pass index to 2, so now we're affecting the shield sphere. Take your index MA output down here to the ID value, like that. And we want to take our original image down here to the bottom of the mix, the first mix node. Whoops. Like that. And now, if we just do Shift, Control, and left click, you'll see we've got our mask. And that's what the gamma node is doing to it. The glow effect here, we could probably do a little bit more. I want a little bit more glow on this one. Make it a little brighter. There we are. And then finally, Shift, Control, left click the blur node. And let's go ahead and knock that down a little farther. Let's knock that down to about 0.6. There you go. All right, and now if we take, now what we want to do is we want to add this image to the planetary glow image. So what we're going to do is, let's see, who do we want on top here? We want this one on the bottom and this one on the top. And do Shift, Control, left click, see what that looks like. Yep, got our 2 images superimposed on top of each other. Now we want to duplicate this add node here. Drop this in here. And we want that output on the top and the original image on the bottom. And now we have our planet with our shield and our planetary glow. Once again, don't forget to take that to the compositor so it will render, and you'll get your compositing effects in the render. And that, folks, is our planetary shield. I'll go ahead and render these out at, say, a few hundred samples so that you'll get a really good idea of what they look like. But that's pretty much all I've got for this one. That's how I make a planet. Notice that you're only dealing with 8,192 vertices, so that's, or faces rather, fewer than 8,000 vertices. So it's a pretty low poly planet as planets go. It animates well, and I used this technique to create the planet in the upload I did about a month ago titled The Arrival. So now you know how I did that. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to do an alien planet texture in GIMP that you can use with something like this to create your own alien Earth-like, or you could use it for any other planets too, any other kinds of planets like gas giants or what have you. But that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you found it useful or at least helpful. Thanks a lot for watching. May the balance of your day be awesome, and we will see you next time.